Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Rational Conversations. Today, we have a really interesting deep dive into the world of mental health and the wellness industry, which is always a little bit dubious. So, if you want to get into that kind of nonsense busting conversation, you've reached the right place. We're going to be busting open a whole bunch of myths and get the wellness industry where it hurts. So, right after the intro, let's get into it. Hey everyone, welcome to Rational Conversations. Today we have with us Dr. Jonathan Stea. He is calling from Calgary and he is a clinical psychologist and he has written a book which I will let him introduce all about. Jonathan, thank you so much for being with us. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you do and about the book you have recently published?
My absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for having me. It was really a kind invitation. So I'm a full-time clinical psychologist. I've been doing this for over 10 years, working in a hospital setting where on an interdisciplinary team. So I work with other psychologists, social workers, psychiatrists, addiction medicine physicians, nurses, occupational therapists, etc. And what we do is we're a very specialized clinic in our public health sector, and we treat people who experience what's called concurrent addiction and psychiatric disorders. So meaning people that have moderate to severe addiction and they have another mental disorder, they come to our clinic. And what I do, what my day job looks like is me doing individual therapy with people, running groups, group therapy, doing case management, working with other bona fide health professions on a person's treatment plan. I sometimes supervise students and residents to help them learn and teach them psychotherapy. So that's been my passion. That's been my work for over 10 years. At the side, I also have an appointment at our local University of Calgary as an adjunct assistant professor. So I do get to dip my toes in some research endeavors and sit on dissertation committees, essentially for master's dissertations and doctoral dissertations, and get to see the cutting edge research that our wonderful students and faculty are doing. And I'd say over the last 5 years or so, I've really taken to science communication. And so that's my kind of third hat. And that's where the book comes in. It's interesting to know that from a perspective of a psychologist, one of our codes of ethics is called, it's a fourth order principle in the Canadian Code of Ethics. It's called responsibility to society. And what that means is that we're ethically obligated to promote and practice evidence-based care. The converse of that is also helping to teach about what non-evidence-based care looks like and helping to essentially debunk misinformation and pseudoscience. So I really took that to heart. And I've been doing that for over 5 years on social media by writing op-eds and articles and doing news stories and various podcasts like this, trying to help people understand misinformation and pseudoscience so they can protect themselves. After doing that for about 5 years or so and finding a wonderful skeptic community online and the science communication online, people would always frequently would email me, or my inboxes would be flooded with people asking me questions like, is this article legitimate? Is this guy a quack? Is this therapy a pseudoscience? And after doing my best to try to help people answer these questions over the 5 years or so, I just really wanted to compile all that information and localize it into a book. And that's what my book is about, trying to really empower and embolden people to take their mental health into their own hands and their health more generally by teaching people the language of pseudoscientific grift and the wellness industry so that they know when to spot and identify pseudoscience so that they know what to seek and what to avoid. It's a long-winded way of answering your question.
No, that's absolutely fine. We're well-winded as it is. That's doesn't.
I like that.
But hell, we're on a podcast. We're meant to be a little bit long-winded, aren't we? But either way, that was not long-winded at all. That was right to the point. In fact, and this is something that I'm very passionate about, especially these days. 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with ADHD. And about a decade ago, almost a decade ago, I was diagnosed with clinical depression. These days, especially now that I have a science communication platform and I'm making these videos, it's become very important for me to be able to communicate the importance of being aware about mental health. And I think we can't have enough awareness about this because there's a lot of misinformation, as you said, and there are lots of myths that people have just propagated instead of people not. It's not about people who have been purposefully misinforming people to make money off them. Of course, there are those people as well. I'm talking about the generational myths and urban legends and weird stories and belief systems around mental health, which have been carried down. Of course, India has got a bunch of them as it is. In fact, it's so deeply ingrained in so many of us. I was wondering if Canada as well has some form of these, like, for example, going to therapy is a form of weakness. If you're depressed, then you should just cheer up. You'll have such a great life. Why you're depressed? Just watch some comedy, have a chat with a friend, or something of that sort. Some of it, of course, can help, but only to a certain extent. These aren't permanent therapies, or these aren't ways to actually get better. But are there any of these really deeply ingrained myths about mental health that exist in Canada?
Absolutely. Those kinds of mental health myths that you're talking about, they don't know any borders. It's a global phenomenon, unfortunately, as is wellness grift more generally. And incidentally, the wellness industry has a pretty rich history. These myths date back to at least over a century. And what you're speaking to is these kinds of moralizing ideas that we find in the wellness industry. So that if you have depression, say, I mentioned in my book, there's a really big influencer named Andrew Tate. He's popular in the, I think, the UK and the US, but he's, yeah, really, I won't mince my words. He's a horrible
Yeah,
guy. He says some
he is.
horrible things. And I quote him in my book by saying things like, if you have depression, he'll say you're quote unquote lazy, fat, weak, just derogatory, stigmatizing, horrible, moralizing language. And what he's doing is he's parroting these old tropes that have been baked into the wellness industry and alternative medicine for a very long time. If we can trace it back, like I mentioned, to over a century, where the kinds of attitudes that we see is such that there's an overemphasis on personal responsibility and a de-emphasis or a trivialization of other factors that matter when it comes to mental health and health more generally, such as downplaying the role of genetics, downplaying the role of social factors, and just plain old bad luck when it comes to things like the causes of health conditions and mental health conditions. And incidentally as well, that overemphasis of personal responsibility becomes distorted because personal responsibility does have a component in all treatments for health conditions, but it just needs to be equally distributed among other factors. But when wellness influencers talk about personal responsibility, they tend to overemphasize pseudoscientific approaches like a dietary protocol that doesn't work, or supplements that are useless, or just flagrantly pseudoscientific psychotherapies like past life regression therapy, where they, for example, if you have post-traumatic stress disorder, a past life regression therapist will say, it's based on the reincarnation hypothesis. So they'll say that your trauma in the current life is based on a trauma that you experienced in a past life. So we need to have you undergo hypnosis to regress you all the way back to the 15th century or whatever it might be, when you were a servant and you experienced some form of trauma. And if you can resolve the trauma in that life, then the trauma in this current life will be resolved. We can laugh at the absurdity of it. And at the same time, I've known patients that have undergone this, and there's a huge industry based on this. So that's the kind of stuff I'm hoping to protect people against by arming them with a kind of science literacy and mental health literacy skills to spot this grift.
And that is fantastic. I'm so glad you're doing that. The Now you mentioned Andrew Tate. I think Jordan Peterson is in that club as well. Not only, and it's weird because he comes from a background of mental health. Like, he's a psychiatrist, isn't he? Or is he a psychologist?
Psychologist.
So he's also a clinical psychologist, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. And I heard him say the most atrocious thing about ADHD. Did you hear what he has to say about ADHD by any
I
chance?
didn't hear that. No.
He basically minimizes it to the extent where he says that ADHD is basically what happens when young boys are not allowed to have rough play. So if your boys are not out there fighting in the dirt, then that's what and then so basically they get ADHD and they you screw up their entire lives because of that. But what about the women? What about the boys who don't like playing rough? What about I watched a little bit of WWE when I was a kid, but there's an extent to that. I was never a very violent kid. And what do you do about that? I didn't want to climb trees. I didn't want to jump around in those kind of with those kind of people and like other people climb trees. I'm gonna chill right down here. Thank you very much. I have no urge to break any bones. But it's just like the entire concept of I mean, that in itself, that one thing that he said was so revealing to how incredibly archaic his beliefs are about mental health. That I honestly, there's nothing else that one can believe in when he talks about anything, really. He is one big walking grift, as far as I'm concerned. It makes absolutely no sense to me. I don't know where he gets these ideas from.
Unfortunately, the pervasiveness of that kind of mental health misinformation is huge. And I can give you an example. So there was a recent study done on TikTok videos with the most popular TikTok videos about ADHD. So that's what the study looked like. It wanted to analyze the content of these popular videos about ADHD, the ones that had videos that had advice giving or kind of information. And what the researchers found, perhaps unsurprisingly, was that about 50% of those videos were misleading. And what blows my mind about that, though, is that these videos were viewed millions of times and shared hundreds of thousands of times. Worse than that, I was very grateful to be invited onto a research team by a public health researcher named Marco Zenon. And we essentially did a similar study where we replicated the methodology from that ADHD TikTok video study. So we took a sample of TikTok videos, the most popular ones on TikTok from a certain time frame. So it was October 2021. We looked at the most popular videos that had a hashtag mental health attached to it. So the top 1,000 mental health related TikTok videos. And we analyzed the content of those videos. And what we found was a similar rate. We found about 33% or one third of those videos that offered advice or information were misleading. But those videos were viewed over a billion times. A billion. So we can't even, like, that's an absurdly big number. And so that's how wide this misinformation spread can go. And that stuff, that information becomes baked into our popular culture, our social media, even our healthcare institutions. And what's really problematic about that is this idea called the illusory truth effect, which is essentially that our brains aren't very good at differentiating familiarity from the truth. So the more times that we see and hear misinformation, the more likely we are to believe it. That's just how our brains evolved, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And that's why debunking and science communication is so important so that we can help challenge these myths.
Fantastic. What are some of the real nasty ones that are out there? What are the things that you're personally really peeved about? Give me a couple of your top three or something of the worst ones.
I'd say the worst ones for me, at least in the realm of mental health. I'll preface this also, let me take a step back. So again, wellness grift knows no borders. That also applies to health disciplines, because when I initially wrote the book, I thought that I'd be doing a deep dive into mental health related misinformation and pseudoscience, which I did. And there are some specific niche areas. But when I got there, I was quite surprised that almost all of the grift extends beyond mental health to cancer, to AIDS, to just general health, to glaucoma, like literally anything. And that's because that's the hallmark of pseudoscience. Pseudoscience tends to pitch itself as a panacea or a cure-all for all conditions. So the supplements that a grifter is trying to sell you doesn't just help you with depression. It can also help you with COVID-19 and your cat's anxiety and whatever it might be, literally anything. But within this specific area of mental health, what really drives me bonkers is essentially the anti-psychiatry movement. And I'll tell people what that means in a moment, because the anti-psychiatry movement is the source where we get a lot of these mental health myths. So the anti-psychiatry movement dates back to at least the 1960s or so. And at that time, it was a reaction to psychiatry's various missteps. And they had a right to be angry, because the discipline of psychiatry was over pathologizing minority groups. There was this perceived arbitrariness of diagnosis. There was inhumane treatment of patients. And so the anti-psychiatry movement was a reaction to that. And it was pioneered by people like Thomas Sass, R.D. Laing, who coined the term anti-psychiatry in 1967. Michel Foucault was one of its intellectual pillars. And so what these guys did was they had a right to be angry. And the good news is that the anti-psychiatry movement at that time worked. It helped psychiatry get its act together and become a more humane discipline and a more scientific discipline. It closed many of those insane asylums, as they were called. It moved psychiatric care to the community and into hospitals. And the focus on the nature or the science of psychopathology was much more scientific. It focused on something called a biopsychosocial model. It looks at the biological contributions as well as the psychological and social contributions. So by about the 1980s or so, the anti-psychiatry greatly diminished. But it didn't die, though. It just transformed and lost its way. And nowadays we see remnants of the anti-psychiatry movement. It's alive and well, and it exists as a disorganized entity, largely on social media and in other non-peer-reviewed sources like books and blogs and websites like Mad in America, which are dedicated to flaming psychiatry in a way that really dodges scientific critique. We see guys like Andrew Tate parroting some of its tropes. Again, that people are lazy if they have depression. Guys like Elon Musk are parroting anti-psychiatry tropes when he takes to social media and posts that SSRIs, which are antidepressant medications, are more harmful than helpful. And he's also attacked ADHD medications as well. And what these guys are doing, I'm not saying that they're necessarily active players in the anti-psychiatry movement, but they are parroting the tropes that derive from the anti-psychiatry movement. And I think it's gotten even worse than that, because we're now even seeing it take a political stage, particularly in the US with Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s MAHA movement. We've seen SSRIs, again, misinformation about them become baked into our political institutions, and they're influencing policy. So when a mass shooting happens, say, what gets blamed is not guns, but SSRIs. And so I think back to your initial question, what are some of the more egregious examples that I've missed that I've seen? Again, they tend to derive from the anti-psychiatry movement. And the two biggest ones that I've seen is just flat out mental illness denial. People will actively deny that mental illness exists. They'll say schizophrenia doesn't exist, depression doesn't exist, ADHD doesn't exist, etc. And then the other big one that we see is that all psychiatric medications are more harmful than helpful on average. And the science just doesn't bear any of this out. They're just old, tired, easily debunked tropes that just don't die. And now they've really taken hold because of political power.
It's ridiculous. Like what's happening in the US is probably the most horrific thing one can possibly imagine. It's reflected a lot in India as well. So when Narendra Modi came onto power, he has he's propagated some rather strange science pseudoscientific ideas. Like the first plastic surgery was done for the elephant-headed god Ganesh, because that is the first example of plastic surgery in the universe, and therefore we pioneered it. And that is, of course, that has been going all over the place. But he also has popularized. In fact, no, he's not just popularized. He's added a tremendous amount of funding to a ministry called Ayush, which is basically, it's an, what do you call it, an abbreviation? Not really, yes. What do you call those things? Abbreviation? What did it? We didn't make it. Anyway, never mind. Acronym. That's the one. Right.
Yes.
So it's an acronym of all the different pseudoscientific medication, like remedies, like Unani, Ayurveda, yoga, homeopathy, naturopathy. They missed out on naturopathy in the name, but never mind it. They still promote that stuff. And they've actually increased a huge amount of funding into it. So now they get to have a say in everything that happens. So when COVID came out, they started promoting different Unani medications and homeopathic medications and even Ayurvedic medications as preventatives for COVID. Not saying that we're insecure, it's just a supplement that will probably save you for it. And it was just blatantly all over the place. So I understand what's happening in the US is similar, but it's even more horrific because this supposedly the person who is in charge of human and health services, health and human services, sorry, has actually got absolutely zero idea about what he's talking about. And it's absolutely horrific. And hopefully, this is not something that is going to spread across the rest of the world, but I do have a bad feeling about this, even then.
I am too worried about the US influence on on the world in terms of spreading misinformation and pseudoscience.
Yeah,
You know,
very
putting
influential country, and everything's a drama in there.
and putting RFK Jr. as the head of US public health is like putting a flat earther as the head of NASA.
Oh,
That's how egregious and
absolutely.
bad it is. Speaking about India, like when I was writing my book, this is before RFK Jr. gained power, although I did write about him a bit in my book. But yeah, I was surprised to learn about how pseudoscience is baked into Indian institutions as well, because I did learn about Ayurveda and homeopathy in the context of the Indian system. And I interviewed an Indian science communicator named Cyriac Abbey Phillips,
Oh,
who is a
yeah.
liver doctor. Yeah.
It's awesome. I've interviewed him on
Yeah.
my channel as well.
He's fantastic. Yeah, he told me about how Ayurveda would treat various mental health conditions like bipolar disorder in just a flagrantly pseudoscientific way. And one thing that I just more generally, just by watching the liver docs crusade against pseudoscience has been obviously inspiring to watch, but also I guess tragic or heartbreaking. I don't know what the word is, but it's terrible that it gets targeted so much by various people that have a lot to lose in the Indian system. And I don't think that's necessarily unique to India. Other science communicators get a ton of harassment and threats as one's platform grows. And I think that's a huge problem just in science communication more generally.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, of course, first of all, Dr. Phillips has got a very harsh tone about him, which I think is very necessary, especially considering the kind of pseudoscience that exists right now in the Indian system, in the Indian culture when it comes to Ayurveda. You're not allowed to talk about it. And if you're nice about it, I try to be nice about it and as forgiving as possible. But sometimes you just got to take a stick to it. And I think he does that extremely well. I had a fantastic interview with him a while back, and it's on my channel. I'll link in the bio. But he's a fantastic person to talk to. But what about the Western the wellness industry? What kind of things does it really promote? Like I've seen some stuff on Instagram. TikTok is banned in India, by the way. So maybe that's a good thing. I don't know. Instagram is just as popular though. But I've seen people who have
Yes.
gone into one of these spiritual awakening people who are really filled with the woo, and they're talking about sun gazing and grounding and stuff like that, especially like walking around barefoot on the ground, which seem to be somehow supposed to help you get, I don't know, lose your anxiety, be less anxious, maybe. But what kind of tropes have you heard about when it comes to these sorts of things, and that you have written about actually?
Yeah. The one of the first, some people regard, back up. There's a guy named Bernard McFadden who is some considered the Western world's first celebrity health influencer. He had a book called, or a magazine line called Physical Culture in 1899. And he was known to strut around New York City barefoot so his soles could absorb the earth's energy. And he'd sleep on the floor so that he could align with the earth's magnetic rhythm. Just again, just quackery. So these ideas are very old. The modern Instagram influencer is just inheriting these ideas and inheriting these tropes and parroting them without any awareness whatsoever. So yeah, the very old sun gazing. The wellness industry is, there's a lot of buzzwords around the wellness industry, detoxing, toxins. You'll hear things like suntan lotion is harmful because of the toxins. So just expose yourself to the sun, stare at it with your eyes. Glasses are, there's been influencers that say glasses are unhelpful. Just absolute absurdities everywhere. And what I really learned in the book was that it's hard to debunk particular kinds of pseudoscientific treatments because I don't know if it's in India, but there's a game here called a whack-a-mole that it's like a
Yeah.
carnival game, and it pops up, and so you hit it, and then the new one pops up, and that's like pseudoscience. So you can debunk one approach, and then another one just pops up, and so for that reason, I really found it helpful to help people understand and address the underlying pseudoscientific features. And so I've given a list in the book, say, of 9 pseudoscientific warning signs or 9 red flags that kind of apply broadly. And that when we see and hear these warning signs, then we are more likely to have unearthed something that's pseudoscientific. So, for example, I can talk about 2 or 3 of those warning signs.
Yeah,
So,
please do.
so one is the use of anecdotal evidence to support one's claims. And so what that means is if you go onto an Instagram page or an alternative medicine website and it's a grifter's website, you'll see just testimonials everywhere.
Yeah.
This person says this treatment works, therefore it works. Well, that's anecdotal evidence. When we're very susceptible to anecdotal evidence because it preys upon one of the most powerful logical fallacies that we have. It's a mouthful. It's called the post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy,
Yeah,
which basically means just because something happened first and it then caused an event to later happen. But we know just because we shower every morning and the sun rises doesn't mean the shower causes the sun to rise. So that's the same idea, is that anecdotal evidence, just we know that it confers very low quality evidence. We need higher scientific studies and higher quality evidence to support one's claims, like randomized controlled trials. Pseudoscientific promoters will just splatter testimonials or anecdotal evidence everywhere. So that's just one warning sign. Another warning sign is using sciencey sounding language to sell someone's products or services.
Can I hear a quantum? Quantum.
That's my favorite and most hated one. Maybe a quantum paradox, right?
Yeah.
I love it and I hate it because that's the one. And I give an example of in the book, there's a chiropractor who promotes quantum neurological reset therapy to treat someone's trauma. And then he'll just go on using quantum related language. And my friend and colleague Timothy Caulfield calls that idea science exploitation, which is a mix of science and exploitation. Using science and
That's amazing.
sciencing language. Yeah, exactly. So that's another one. I think of those 9 warning signs, the one that I think really is the most powerful one that separates the wheat from the chaff is something called claims divorced from the broader scientific literature. So what I mean by that is when someone is making a claim or a hypothesis that is just completely divorced, there's no mountains of scientific evidence to support it. So for example, we can use homeopathy. Homeopathy obviously purports the idea that a remedy becomes more effective as its active ingredient becomes diluted out of existence because water somehow remembers the properties of that active ingredient, which is just absurd because that claim is divorced from fundamental principles in pharmacology and even the laws of physics. So when you get people making those kinds of claims, it's just, that's a huge warning sign. The same with energy healing, where you have someone saying, like a Reiki practitioner, who can manipulate and balance your human energy fields around you. We don't have human energy fields. They're not anatomical structures. It violates, principles in biology. Those claims are huge kind of pseudoscientific warning signs, obviously, and they don't just apply to health conditions in general. There are Instagram influencers and alternative medicine clinics who will use homeopathy and Reiki to treat depression or post-traumatic stress disorder or anxiety or ADHD or whatever it is. And it's important that people know what these warning signs are, because it's not only financial exploitation, it's emotional exploitation. And pseudoscience is not an innocent game, because when people are, first of all, they can be directly harmed by some of these products like supplements or whatever the pseudoscientific treatment is, but it can also indirectly harm people by taking hard-earned time and money and resources away from people. And when they're seeking pseudoscientific treatments, their mental health and health symptoms could be getting worse, because they should be seeking evidence-based approaches and care.
Absolutely. Like one of the most horrible things I heard is the Church of Scientology is, I think, infamous when it comes to it's the laughing stock of most of the religious world. Even the most devoutly religious of other religions would look at Scientology and say, those guys are crazy. But the problem is that their central, like they use that whatever meter that they have that they're supposed to tape onto your fingers or something of that sort.
E-meter. Yeah.
The e-meter. And using that meter, they're trying to tell you about how what your energies and you're basically trying to diagnose your mental health in certain aspects. And they suck you in and they pull you in by propagating these ideas that not only are your mental health problems not what you have been told, but the entire world of psychiatry and psychotherapy is an absolute farce. That this entire thing is one big conspiracy theory, and that they are the authorities on actually helping people get better when it comes to mental health. I think I can remember one of those interviews with Tom Cruise where he says that we are the authorities on psychotherapy, we are the authorities on mental health. And there have been people, and so they're taking massive doses of different vitamin supplements. They're going through these extremely strenuous culty kind of rituals, and there have been people who have committed suicide because their symptoms haven't been resolved. They have not gotten any better. They've probably got worse. And of course, because of the kind of hold that they have on you and they disconnect you from your loved ones because of their cult like structure, you don't have any other support system to help you rebound from bad episodes or to help you regain some sense of social bonding that could actually, even in that you could benefit from. And it's absolutely horrific how these people are doing it. And I think I would probably call them a mental health cult kind of thing, to put it softly, mildly. It's actually really dangerous. And then you have people like Goop, not people like Goop, but Gwyneth Paltrow, who has been promoting things like Goop, where she's selling all sorts of random products that are supposed to make you feel a lot better about whatever else is happening in your life. And it is, as you said, taking people away, not only away from the treatment, but further into their disorders, which can be fatal. It's very, really, it's very, really dangerous for people. This isn't a laughing matter or something that Mythbusters can sweep under the rug or something of that sort. But I think that is one of the most important things that we need to fight in our world today is, of course, it's regular health as well. So much of the wellness industry is about the regular health of people, but fighting the pseudoscience behind mental health is just as important. It's astounding to the extent that people go to fool their followers, basically. I can't really pinpoint. We have, of course, Sadhguru, and we have a lot of gurus in our country who, instead of asking people to go and seek proper mental health therapy, which obviously they won't, they just tell them to go to a temple and do certain rituals and everything is going to be fine. And people keep doing that and getting worse and worse. And they, it's just, it's awful. We are trying to do our level best to inform people. But how do you think the regular everyday or somebody who's watching this podcast, how, other than these three red flags that you pointed out, what should they do as a positive thing to help themselves understand their mental health better understand whether they're actually going through something real, whether they have a certain problem, whether it's passing or whether it's a chronic thing, and what kind of help should they seek ideally. What do you think?
Well, I agree wholeheartedly with everything you're saying, and that's the major crux of my book is trying to make the case that alternative medicine and the wellness industry is making us sicker. It's really it's an illusory kind of name. I'll answer that, but let me just touch on two things you mentioned because I want to go there for a moment. You talked about Scientology, and that is one spoke on the wheel of this anti-psychiatry movement I've been talking about. You can see them on social media. There's a front group called the CCHR, the Citizens Commission on Human Rights. And they're a front group for the Scientology. You go to their social media page, and it's just all anti-psychiatry propaganda. And in my book, I I talk a bit about that. I talk about the Tom Cruise interview, and I actually went to one of the CCHR's museums
Oh,
on holidays. I dragged my wife to one of the museums that they have, which I paid for in the end because you go outside and it's just this big red label or attraction, and it's called Psychiatry and Industry of Death. And then you walk in there and you just walk through this museum and it's just terrifying because the there's terrified faces that are lighting up all around you, and there's a lot of Holocaust imagery and just pills on display, like pill bottles, and how dangerous psychiatry is. We only lasted 10 minutes because it also smelled really bad, and then like I mentioned, we're on holidays and my wife said we need to get the hell out of there, so we did. But I got a photo and I put that photo in the book. So Scientology does play a role in the anti-psychiatry movement. You mentioned Goop as well. Goop also recycles these old ideas and treatments. So, for example, Gwyneth Paltrow was advertising on the Goop website coffee enemas for depression. So, coffee enema is sticking coffee up someone's bum for depression.
I mean, I love
And
coffee, but not that.
coffee is a friend, not an enema. What my
Oh, I
friend
love that.
Ryan
That's brilliant. That's brilliant.
My friend Ryan Marino says that he's a toxicologist. But yeah, and coffee enemas aren't new either. They come from something called the Gerson therapy, which was developed by a physician, Max Gerson, in the 1930s for the treatment of degenerative diseases like cancer. And it's supposed to work through liver and intestinal detoxification. But the reality is that there is no medical theory or scientific body of evidence that coffee enemas or Gerson therapy works. And in fact, coffee enemas can be quite dangerous and result in burns and inflammation and even bacteria in the bloodstream. So not good. And Goop is advertising this on their website and endorsed by holistic psychiatrist Kelly Brogan, who also just fell off the deep end and starts to promote a wellness grift. So, anyways, these ideas are not new. And then you asked, what do people do about it? I wish I had the complete answer to that. My role or my goal for the book was to approach it from the role of a clinical psychologist and a full-time clinician at the individual level. So I wanted to help people learn about the language of pseudoscientific grift, the language of alternative medicine, and try to encourage people to improve or increase their science literacy and mental health literacy skills and adopt a kind of intellectual humility that's associated with the scientific spirit, and also try to tune into and upset the biases that filter the way in which we see the world. And that's the general approach that I try to make the case in the book. When it comes to how do people know when they should seek bona fide help, the short answer is to try to seek it from bona fide sources. So these are real mental health professionals. And this is not a guarantee. The role of a regulatory body is to try to weed out grifters from non-grifters. So
Yeah.
on average, bodies like the American Psychological Association or the Canadian Psychological Association they're a body of experts, and they should have helpful resources, fact sheets, referral programs. I'm not sure about the system in India, but you want to be seeking bona fide clinical psychologists, social workers, nurses, psychiatrists, physicians that can offer a comprehensive psychological assessment. And you want to spot red flags too. I devote the entire chapter 9 of my book to answering the question that you just had, which is questions that people can take with them to question their providers, to size them up to see if they're in short a grifter or not.
Wonderful. And is your book in audiobook form as well?
Yes.
Wonderful. I will definitely give it a read because it's very hard for me to actually read anymore these days. I just listen to audiobooks these days most of the time. And I will put a link in the bio for Jonathan's book. I'm sure it's fantastic, and I'm really sorry I haven't read it yet. But it is
It's okay.
literally, it is the next book I'm going to read. I did ghostwrite a book a couple of years ago, which I don't want to put in a little shameless plug, but which I will also link in the bio. But basically, it was to understand and bring awareness to people about the mental health of adolescents in particular. So I've gone through, first of all, the problems in India, especially, where we have thousands of people to one psychiatrist. We don't have anywhere close to the actual number of psychiatrists we need for a population our size. And we also don't have enough psychotherapists, it's an equivalent thing. And the people who are there, a lot of them, we don't know what their actual qualifications are and how good they might be. So the practice that I usually follow is I ask people whether they are seeing a therapist, whether they are seeing a psychiatrist, how their experience has been, and if they are happy with that experience, I go there. And and I haven't mentioned this in the book or anything, I'm just mentioning that in my own personal experience, what I try to do is, even with the psychiatrist who is helping me quite well, and I'm on a good regimen of medicines, and I've got a good therapist, every year or so, I go to another psychiatrist who comes recommended. I give them a full lowdown of my medical history and my mental health, and I ask them for their opinion on whether I'm on the right track, I'm on the right medication, I'm on the right therapeutic regimen, and so that I get to verify every single step of the way and make sure that these doctors are actually employed in reputable hospitals and not in the Ayurvedic department, right? Or the homeopathic one for that matter, because there are hospitals
Absolutely.
that have that stuff.
You make such a strong point too, because again, my book tries to address it at the individual level. I don't have the answers at the social or policy level, and that's what's concerning because when people don't have access to evidence-based care, access and availability, that opens the door for pseudoscience promoters to slither in and kind of open for business.
Exactly. And I've heard that there are spiritual therapists as well. And that concerns me because that makes me wonder what kind of stuff do you talk about? My aura was feeling a little down yesterday, like it turned from purple to a little bit brown. I don't know. I don't want to make fun of it because I don't know enough about it. But at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised if something like that actually popped up. I don't, sometimes fact is far stranger than fiction. And also in the book that I wrote, it has about 10 stories of teenagers going through different aspects of different mental health conditions. So even if there's depression can contain quite a wide range of symptoms and effects. So there could be just simple depression. There could be depression with self-harm. So we've tackled self-harm in a different story. We've tackled somebody who is discovering that they are trans. We're discussing general anxiety disorder and ADHD. So we've tried to cover as much of the breadth of mental health as possible. And at the end of the day, though, one thing which I discovered, which I think is fantastic, is one of the most important aspects of mental health, which I think is more accessible than anyone actually thinks, is actually having a social support structure. To have friends and family that you can count on, that you can talk to about these things, and people who you can rely on, who won't judge you for what you're saying, who won't guide you down the wrong path, but be there to understand you and accept you as you are. I think that is one of the most important things that we can have without necessarily having a huge sprawling mental health system, which I think is very important as well. But for a country that doesn't have one, I think having that social connection is extremely important. Of course, some people won't be able to have one of those, but I don't really know what to offer those people. But as
That's what
long
we
as they
do with
don't,
psychotherapy. Like that you're speaking to a hallmark of mental health, and it's hard when people don't have it, and we have to try to help people find ways to build that social network.
so it is possible then.
Yes.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I think that actually wraps things up quite nicely. Thank you so much for joining me, Doctor. It has been an absolute pleasure and a real eye opening conversation. I'm definitely going to listen to your book. Everybody who's listening, please buy his book, go to the link in the description, and educate yourself more about what mental health really is and what the wellness people are trying to make of it. And don't let them do it, for Christ's sake. For Christ's
Yes,
sake.
please.
Yeah, well, ironic
It
for
was
a
a,
serious channel.
a lot of fun and a super important topic. So thanks so much for having me.
It was an absolute pleasure, Jonathan. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. If you really like this conversation, please give it a like. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more of this kind of stuff. And until next time, be rational.